All right, so our next presentation will be by Alita Kennard from the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District. Alita is the Supervisor of Technical Services at the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Engineering from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. As the Supervisor of Technical Services, Alita oversees air monitoring, rule development, emission reduction credits, and the wood smoke fireplace change-out program at the district. Prior to her assignment to technical services, Alita worked as an engineer and as a supervisor in the district's permitting program. Alita's presentation today is entitled The Importance of Good Station Operation Documentation from an End User Point of View. Please welcome Alita Kennard.
I just want to say, after listening to Phil, I want to thank all the station operators. My staff, I have staff that are station operators also, but you guys have a lot on your plate, and you have to keep aware of a lot of things that weren't even discussed today, and I really appreciate all that you do. I'm just going to quickly tell you, I'm actually giving this presentation for someone else, so hopefully I'm going to cover what she wanted me to cover in this presentation, but if you're at LA in the next training, give Janice Lamb heck, because she's actually in Italy today instead of here with the rest of you. So So there was basically 6 key questions that Janice was trying to answer in this presentation, and a lot of this is going to has been covered in a number of over the last 2 days, and so I'm going to just skip through real quickly those things that maybe has already been touched on, and just highlight the things that are more newer in this particular presentation. So this slide is just Debbie kind of covered this when she was speaking at the first presentation. But from my point of view, you guys and the data you collect are pretty much the heart of the air quality programs. It's the start of the program. It leads into the ambient air quality standards. It also leads into whether a particular area is in attainment or not. The data you collect is used in enforcement cases. It's used as we implement regulatory programs like episodic controls. And you're at the end of the program, too, or at the end of the whole circle, because your data is showing progress, and hopefully, if we're lucky, it's showing attainment of the standards. So it's very important that we have high quality and defensible data. This slide is talking about data assessment. There's both internal and external reviews that quality control that's done as part of data assessment. And this, I think, is mostly in here to highlight. This will be covered, the second and third level of data review, in the next module that will be done in the fall. So this is kind of, I think, an emphasis to maybe get you to come to the next module. Now, I think this is in here because this is Patrick's quote, it sounds like. So ARB is committed to effective review, verification, validation, reporting, certification, and assessment of all data generated by or on behalf of such as contractors or utilized within its PQAO, including secondary data. ARB and air monitoring organizations within its PQAO define and formalize these activities in a roles and responsibilities document that's been talked about previously. So why is documentation so important? It's an explanation of what occurred. And so for the end user, we may be looking at data 5 years after something has occurred. And it basically It's the proof of what happened at the time the data was collected. Documentation gives us tools to reconstruct the conditions that occurred, and it provides legal defensibility. Since the data that we collect is used for regulatory purposes, such as attainment designations, it ensures that the data is correct and accurate. Documentation creates confidence in the data so that when you're making reports to the public or using it for regulatory determinations, you're confident that the decisions that are made are based on accurate data. There are many end users to data. It varies from auditors to even yourselves. Also, site operators in other areas could be end users. There's analysts like statisticians or the public that use the data. So there's a lot of people that use that data. So it's important that it's high quality and defensible. So you've heard this before. So what happens if I don't document? Well, if it wasn't documented, then it didn't happen. That's what you heard Phil say. It's the potential for data to be lost. And that can go both ways. If you lose the data, it could cause, or if you don't have the documentation, the data might count when it shouldn't. And it could be that you lose it and it won't count when you need it to count. The other thing it does for the end user is if you haven't done the documentation, like I said before, in a lot of cases, it may be 5 years down the line before an end user is actually trying to reconstruct what that data means. And if the documentation is not there, it can take a lot of time to go back, try and figure out what happened 5 years ago. If you don't document, it's difficult to justify the procedures you took were followed correctly and completed. And the nature of it being routine provides legal defensibility of the procedures that are taken. So as we've been talking, documentation is pretty much the who, what, where, how of the activities that influence the data. We've talked about SOPs and safety information and manuals as being part of that documentation. And it's in the QC checks, all the observations. So one of the main things we think documentation does is it improves communication between the operators and the end users. It quickly connects that communication. It also ensures consistency with the data, and it helps identify issues early on or prevents bigger issues from occurring. So it's more proactive rather than reactive when there's problems. It's also a piece of the puzzle. If you're trying to do an exceptional event without the documentation, that puzzle piece is lost. It helps the auditors, and it helps with future troubleshooting. It's a way to go, you had a problem, you had that problem 5 years ago, you'd be able to go to the documentation to see what you did before. I'm not going to go over this. This is, again, just the regulatory requirements. So basically, to emphasize on documentation, one of the things we've ran into many times is make sure your documentation's legible. Make sure you can read it, that you sign and date it, that it's prompt, accurate, and it's identifiable. And this is just an example of the right way, wrong way of putting some documentation. So when you're making a correction, make a single line through the error, record the correct entry above or next to the original entry, and basically give the reason for correction, not something like just say mistake. You want to say error in writing or whatever it really was, make it clear, and sign it or initial and date it. There are different types of documentation. There's the automated, where you have the auto calibrations, the data loggers, the instrument diagnostics, and then there's the manual with the check sheets, the logbooks, the chain of custody, and the calibrations and troubleshooting. They're both very needed documentation. You need to make sure you have a station logbook. and an instrument logbook with monthly, biweekly checks. That the residence times are posted. You have your certifications, your SOPs, your manuals, and the safety information. This is all what we've been talking about over the last 2 days. So when you're documenting, what it helps for the end user is what happened or what did you suspect happened that caused the data. When did it occur and for how long did it occur? Say how you found it out. Did you observe it? Did you see an outside event that you're not documenting, whatever it is? What did you do to resolve the problem? Did you change out parts? Did you talk to the manufacturer? It saves time in the long run, and it's a resource for you and others. And it also helps identify in budget times when it might be time to buy a new one instead of continuing to fix it. This is the pros and cons, it looks like to me, between paper logs and electronic logs. But you basically are going to want both. You want to be able to cross-check in certain instances. So just really quickly, documentation is extremely important. It's for the high quality, legally defensible, but it's also for the end user to be able to reconstruct that data when they go to analyze the data. And as we've all said, good documentation contains, it's legible, it's prompt, it's signed, initial, and date, identifiable, and accurate. And that's just another listing of the resources. So thank you. And like I said, give Janice hell in LA.